Hello my friends, welcome to day 17 of this 20-day flower creation journey. My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Today we're going to paint together these beautiful flowers, Icelandic poppies. We are going to recreate these petals, light petals, this bright center and these long stems. Let's start with the flowers. In order to create these flowers, I take my filbert brush and I mix on the color palette a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of yellow lemon dip. I add a little bit of orange, this is Winsor Orange from Winsor & Newton, and I created the first layer of these poppies. To create the first layer, I use a very light first layer where the amount of pigment is not very concentrated. So I have a high amount of water and a quite small amount of pigment because I remove part of the pigment in the cup of water. And using the side and the belly of this brush, I create a round shape, leaving a white center in the middle. This round shape doesn't have to be perfect, it just needs to give the impression that there are petals that we are going to highlight in a second stage when we're going to add a second layer of paint. In this phase, when the first layer is still wet, I've decided to add a little bit of Winsor Orange, more concentrated, and I allow this color to blend while the layer underneath is still wet, creating beautiful effects. You can decide to add any color on top and to let it blend with the underneath first layer, but I'm using the Winsor Orange to recreate a flower that in the color is quite similar to the picture I have in front of me. I start to create the second flower in the same way, using the side of my brush and the belly of my brush, and I create a general round shape where this first layer represents really just the petals and is not too defined. We will add a definition with the second layer on top when the first layer is going to be completely dry. I add a little bit of Winsor Orange and a little bit of Scarlet Lake, and I allow these two colors to blend with the underneath yellow layer. I usually create the first layers of this type of flowers in a very light color, and usually I add layers on top that contain more pigment and less water and therefore are more concentrated. In order to create a very light first layer, remember to create on the color palette the color that you wish to have on the paper and just remove in the cup of water the excessive amount of pigment that you have on your brush. Therefore, when you're going to lay your brush onto paper, the pigment is going to be not so concentrated and the first layer is going to become very light in color. As you can see, the round shape of this third flower, but also of the other two, is not perfect, and I don't mind because we are going to add more details in a second step. Feel free to experiment when you are creating first layers, experiment with shapes, experiment with the colors that you are going to use, try to blend into the first layer, maybe some colors that are completely different from the base color, and don't be afraid to try something that you have never tried before. Sometimes from experiments and from trials that are completely unexpected, some of the most beautiful results can happen. At this point, the main three flowers are created, and then I take my round brush in size 12. This is a quite thick brush, and I use a little bit of sap green to create the stems of these poppy flowers. Stems are straight, and therefore I use just the tip of my brush to start to delineate the shape of these stems. Since the first layer of these flowers, of the petals of these flowers, is not completely dry, when I use the tip of the brush that contains greens and I touch the petals, some of the green can blend into the yellow poppy. If this is something that you like to obtain, go ahead and leave it as it is. But if you don't like to have a blending effect between the green and the yellow, orange, just do not touch the petals or just start to create these stems when the petals are completely dry. And now the fun part starts. In this moment, I'm using a quite small round brush. This is a round brush from Princeton in size 6. And I start to use this brush to create the second layer on top of the first one. Basically, with the second layer, I'm giving a little bit more definitions to these petals and I'm trying to create a little bit of contrast. For this reason, I started to create some lines and some sort of round shapes that reminds a little bit the shadows that are created when the sun and the light hits these flowers and these petals. In order to create these shapes, I'm using sometimes just the fine tip of this brush and sometimes the belly. When I use the belly of the brush, these strokes are going to be a little bit bigger. When I use just the tip of the brush, these lines are going to be very fine and based on how much pressure I put onto the paper, I can obtain different effects. I often like to start to create this second layer with a color that is quite similar to the base, and then to add through the wet on wet technique some more bleeding effects with more concentrated colors. For example, in this moment I am adding a little bit of more concentrated red and orange into the first layer. I start to create these lines and bleeds effects in the second poppy, and I start with an orange color that is quite similar to the base of these petals but a little bit more concentrated. And here I'm adding a little bit of red that is much more concentrated and is actually a different color from what I used in the base, and I let it blend with the second layer that I've just created. I add fine lines to define better the shape of these petals. You can try to add as a second layer also strokes that are in a color completely different from the base. I have tried this in the past and I have to say that sometimes the effects are really beautiful. In this tutorial, I'm keeping the second layer quite similar to the first layer of paint, therefore these poppies overall will appear in an orange overall color. You can add as many strokes as a second layer as you like, but if you also like to have these poppies not as defined as the ones that I'm creating, you can stop this process at any moment, and you can also have very simple flowers that are just created by laying on the paper the very first layer, maybe with some wet in wet technique. I proceed creating some strokes on the third flower. And the way I like to proceed in first place is to try to define better some of the petals. I use the tip of the brush and then I put a little bit of pressure to create some strokes that are a little bit thicker in shape. I remove a part of the pigment, and using just a little bit of pigment with a lot of water, you will create some brush strokes that are quite transparent. To understand where to add these lines, you can look at the reference picture, but you can also just use your imagination and your artistic feeling to decide where to add these strokes. That's actually what I'm doing, and I have to say I'm still learning the process of optimizing, let's say, where to add these brush strokes. I started to add a few brush strokes in a yellow color, and I've taken a little bit of yellow lemon dip to create some lines in a different color overall. It takes me time, I have to say, to understand where to add these lines and also to decide which color to use. I encourage you to do the same if you like to create this second layer that is quite predominant on your flowers. And I also encourage you to take some time to really understand and enjoy the process of adding layers on your petals. In this moment, I'm adding a few strokes in magenta. And I've chosen magenta because it's a color that in this moment clashes with the orange and the yellow that I've used. So I really like to create a little bit of contrast with this magenta color. At this point, I rinse off my brush, and using the same round brush in size 6, I mix a little bit of green that I have on the palette and yellow lemon dip, and I start to create the center of these flowers. The center is just creating by using the tip of this brush and letting the tip just touch the paper with not so much pressure. Using the same brush, but just a different color, this is yellow ochre, I just create a little bit of more definition into the center of these flowers. And so I add a little bit of strokes very close and also on top of this center that I've created in yellow lemon dip. These flowers, if I look at the reference picture, don't have any main leaf. Therefore, actually, we have reached almost the end of this tutorial. And I really hope you enjoyed and you had fun watching this video and painting with me. I hope to see you on day 18.